Welcome back to Face the Nation. We want to continue our conversation with Fiona Hill, former top advisor on Russia at the National Security Council during the Trump administration. Fiona, this is really these two personalities, Volodymyr Zelensky and Vladimir Putin, and it's all about trying to change Putin's mind. At this point, is there any succession plan if he is no longer running Russia?
Well, there's always a succession plan, at least in theory, which is, if something happens to him normally, then either the Prime Minister or the Speaker of the Russian Parliament would step in and they would have elections. Now, under this current circumstance, there is just absolutely no way that Vladimir Putin wants to loosen his grip on power. 2024, he's supposed to have a presidential election. In theory, as we know, he's got 2 more presidential terms that he can contest, and that would take him out till 2036. And Putin has, if anything, some staying power. He's pretty much determined to stay in place, and there is absolutely no way that he would want to go out on the back, in any way, on the back of a disaster in Ukraine.
So this is in some ways solidifying his hold on power rather than weakening it?
Absolutely, from his perspective. Now, it doesn't mean to say, of course, that hold is fully consolidated. It's very brittle, the situation right now. So many things can go wrong. So many things could be happening behind the scenes that we actually don't know about. But for Putin himself, the absolute last thing he wants to do is go out in the backdrop of protests, backdrop of a failed war, as other previous leaders in Russian history have. And there's no way that he's going to entertain any kind of idea of a palace coup. He knows the history. He knows how these things work. And the immediate group of people around him who helped plot this war are also going to rise and fall with him. So you can be sure that they're trying to root out any kind of dissent, any kind of opposition at this moment. And also on the popular level. I mean, we're hearing in public opinion polls that there's a lot of support for Putin. I mean, it's hard to, kind of really gauge again how deep that support is. People are rallying around the flag, rallying around him, rallying around the Kremlin. And he's going to make sure, of course, that any kind of alternate views are completely and utterly suppressed at this moment.
You've written extensively about Putin. I know President Biden has read your book on him. One of the things you write about is what's happened in the past with ceasefire agreements in Chechnya. And that's why I asked about security guarantees with President Zelensky. In the past, Russia has torn up peace agreements, just reinvaded. Is that what Vladimir Zelensky is looking at now, the risk of that?
I mean, he has to be very serious about this. And as he said, they're fed up now on the Ukrainian side with paper agreements. They have to have something real and concrete. And that's going to be what's going to be difficult. Because it can't just be from the United States either. The previous agreement, the Budapest agreement, was with the United States, the United Kingdom and Russia. And obviously that was in 1994 when Ukraine gave up its strategic nuclear weapons. That became pretty meaningless. And so what Zelensky is looking for, obviously, as he said, is some pretty concrete guarantees from a range of countries. He talked there about the circle of countries that might be involved. And it has to be outside of Europe as well. This is part of the problem.
Right.
As Putin is making this a proxy war, he's saying to everyone else, this is like the Cold War, this is like Korea or Vietnam. This is not the case. Putin has decided to invade a neighbouring country. It's a post-imperial land grab. It's based on history, his grievances, his view of Russia's place in Europe. And basically, it has to be addressed in an international context. So they need wide-ranging international security guarantees.
It is a global problem now. Fiona Hill, thank you for your analysis. I want to get more from former National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster. He's also CBS News foreign policy national security contributor and host of the podcast Battlegrounds. Good morning to you, H.R. Tactically and strategically speaking, why would Russian forces move to the east?
Well, to try to get something out of this, right, and to try to compensate for the utter failure of the offensive initially. It's quite clear that Russia has failed from the very beginning in connection with its original objectives to subjugate all of Ukraine and to effect this coup de main oriented on these 4 axes, but mainly on Kyiv and Odessa. And what you see is a concentration now in the Donbass region and in the south. It's interesting, Margaret, we haven't heard too much talk about this, but this is about 10% of the Ukrainian landmass, but about the landmass that holds about 90% of Ukraine's energy resources. And I think what you see Russia as having a strategic design in mind as Fiona mentioned, right? This is about Novorossiya and so forth, but it's also making the Sea of Azov clearly a Russian lake, and the Black Sea as well.
Well, I thought it was interesting. President Zelensky said, when I asked him, does this mean, 100% withdrawal from all of Ukrainian territory? And he said Russia needs to withdraw to the borders pre-February 24th. So that would mean potentially those eastern Donetsk and Luhansk areas and Crimea. Is that significant to you, the way he phrased that?
It is significant. It means that he's willing to compromise to a certain extent, but I think that's got to be up to him and the Ukrainian people. You've seen the horrors, the devastation. I've heard your conversation, which is just terrible with Zelensky and the horrors that they're confronting now in the wake of the Russian withdrawal. I think that it's going to be up to the Ukrainian people, obviously, if they're willing to compromise at all after that. And it's hard to imagine that they will want to give up any of their territory.
Yeah. Well,
and of course, Margaret, hey, I think the other point about this is, of course, Zelensky knows that wouldn't be the end, right? If Vladimir Putin says, "Oh, I'll return back to the pre-February borders," of course, what he'll do is try to keep Ukraine under his thumb and under continuous duress, just as he has since at least 2003, and especially after 2014.
Yeah, and it's exactly what you just put your finger on there that has the surrounding European countries so concerned that he could continue to destabilize the area. But I want to ask you about that. Why would Putin risk bringing a NATO country into a war that is being described as one where his military is failing? Is the U.S. and Europe making him 10 feet tall when he's not?
Yes, I think so. I think Putin is really on the ropes here, and of course, what does he have left, Mario? He only has left are threats, cyber threats. Well, that's not working out for some reason. I think we'll learn more about that later. But then the only thing he can do is rattle his nuclear saber, which is what he's done. And of course, that's a cause for concern. But I think we have to not forget the don't part of don't take counsel of our fears. And I think at this stage, what we're seeing when we confront the horrors and the mass murder that has occurred and the horrible abuses, I think we feel now compelled to do more. Well, I think what we shouldn't do is wait any longer to do what it takes to give Ukraine all the tools necessary to fully beat back this offensive and to make it clear to the Russians that they're going to be unable to renew an offensive in the future.
Just to be really clear with our viewers, since you served in the military for so long, what we are describing and what is being documented as having happened outside Kyiv is very far beyond the acceptable code of conduct for U.S. military forces. Can you just put that in context for anyone who would say war is always bloody? How do you see what happened?
Well, this is an unprofessional force. This is a force that is not adhering to the basic military ethic or the law of war or just war theory. Jus in bello theory requires you to apply force with discipline and discrimination, and to protect non-combatants. Of course, Russia actually, its tactic was to commit mass murder against non-combatants because it didn't have the military competence to accomplish its objectives through fire and maneuver and the defeat of the opposing military force and then the control of that territory. So this is against the law of war. It's against the military ethic, and it's against what we have in our armed forces, the professional warrior ethos, which is based on principles such as honor and self-sacrifice. And that also includes taking on more risk ourselves to protect innocence, even in an activity that involves killing and the prospect of death.
H.R. McMaster, thank you for your analysis today. We'll be right back. Last week, CBS News and the Washington Post revealed that internal White House phone records from January the 6th showed a 7-hour gap in President Trump's call logs during the violence at the Capitol that day. Maryland Democratic Congressman Jamie Raskin is on the House committee investigating the attack on the Capitol and joins us here now. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
The nation. This 7-hour gap. You have subpoenaed the former president's assistant, Molly Michael. I know you've been trying to figure out from staff what happened. Do you have any insight?
Well, it's a very unusual thing for us to find that suddenly everything goes dark for a 7-hour period in terms of tracking the movements and the conversations of the president. Some things we've been able to piece together from other people's interviews and depositions that we know took place during that time. We are aware of other phone calls that took place during that time that included the president, but we have no comprehensive, fine-grained portrait of what was going on during that period, and that's obviously of intense interest to us.
Mm-hmm. You still don't have that after debriefing some of these assistant. I mean, his office, the former president's office, was known for being sloppy. He used cell phones. The personal assistant wasn't in the office that day. Is there a chance here that this was just sort of large-scale incompetence rather than conspiracy?
Well, we're taking that possibility into account. It does seem like the gaps are suspiciously tailored to the heart of the events, but we're checking that out. And, you know, our mandate under H.R. 503 is to get a complete picture of everything that took place on January 6th, the causes leading up to it, and then what we need to do as a country to fortify democratic institutions and processes against future insurrections and coups and attempts to destabilize and overthrow our elections.
I mean, it's just an incredible phrase, potential future coups. It's sort of breathtaking to hear you say it that way.
Congressman Mo Brooks said just a week or two ago that former President Trump continues to try to get him and other Republicans to rescind the election. In other words, he continues to look for a way to nullify an election that he considers fraudulent. Last night, you know, I was at the Gridiron Club dinner and I saw the governor, the Republican governor of New Hampshire, Chris Sununu, who I thought was a huge breath of fresh air. He said publicly, he broke tradition apparently in the Gridiron Club, he said, Donald Trump is effing crazy. And he didn't say effing, so I don't want to make any history on your show. But he also seemed to announce that he was going to run for president in 2024, laying down the gauntlet essentially against the Trump-Putin axis within the Republican Party.
So your earpiece just popped out there.
Yeah.
But
even though I didn't say the word.
Yep. Well, you can hear me. I mean, are you concerned that at the end of this investigation, you're not going to find what it sounds like you're looking for, which is substantiation of a link between a pressure campaign to change the election results and the events of January 6th itself? I mean, are you confident you'll get that and you will be able to make a criminal referral to the Justice Department? Well,
no, I think you've put your finger on it. I mean, we know there were two things going on. And one was a violent insurrection that included a mob riot, which injured 150 of our officers with broken jaws and broken necks and broken vertebrae and so on. And then that was led by domestic violent extremist groups like the Proud Boys, who then President Trump had told to stand back and stand by, the Oath Keepers, the Three Percenters, people who've been charged with seditious conspiracy, which means conspiracy to overthrow the government. They shut down the counting of electoral college votes for the first time in American history. Didn't even happen when Lincoln took the presidency in 1861. Okay, so there was that violent insurrection, but then there was an attempt at an inside coup, what the political scientists call a self-coup. Not a coup against a president, but a coup that's orchestrated by the president against the constitutional system. And what we're looking for is the connections between the inside political coup and the violent insurrection. And I do feel confident we're going to be able to tell that story.
But tell that story is different in the political context from making a criminal recommendation or a legal proceeding at the Justice Department. Are you confident that will happen?
Well, we will lay out the evidence that we see. Now, understand, the role of the January 6th Select Committee is to deliver a report to the American people and to the Congress. And so individual criminal accountability is something that comes within the domain of the Department of Justice.
That's why I wanted to make that clear.
Yeah, and one of the traditions we want to rebuild that was torn down during the last administration was of not having members of Congress and the president trying to dictate policy to the Department of Justice. And that's what the last president did, and I'm glad this president's not doing it, and we don't want to be part of that.
How long is too long? Because we keep hearing that the public hearings are getting pushed off. Is it May? Is it June? When do you cut this off?
I think that the hearing should be in early May. That's what I'm hoping for. Obviously, we're up against a lot of obstruction. Now, this week, we voted to bring contempt citations against Dan Scavino and Peter Navarro, the social media guy for him. And Peter Navarro was the trade advisor who, for some reason, was off involving himself in insurrectionary coup plotting activities. And those guys are claiming executive privilege, which is absurd.
And that vote is going to be happening this week.
We hope so, yes.
We will be back with more Face the Nation in a moment. We turn now to the stunning increase in violent crime, and fighting that increase is one of the top priorities for New York City's new mayor, Eric Adams. Good morning to you, Mr. Mayor. Good to have you in studio.
Thank you. Good to be here.
New York City is the highest number of shootings in a decade, more than 40% spike in homicides over the last 2 years. You've some of the toughest gun laws in the country. Where are all these weapons coming from?
That's a great question. In my conversation with the president and the chief of staff yesterday, we talked about just the flow of guns to our inner cities. A few days ago, I was in Chicago with Mayor Lightfoot, who took several thousands of guns off a street last year. And here in New York, we're doing the same. We really have to have a combination. We have to stop the flow of guns, but we must also do the job of getting the guns off the streets that's on there now. And my anti-gun unit, they're doing that. Just a few weeks out, they removed over 20-something guns off the street. But here's the interesting number. 70% of those who were carrying the guns had prior violent offenses. So we need to combine with that small number of people who are carrying guns with the large number of guns on our street and get both off our street.
But you know that acknowledging that and having some of the toughest gun laws in the country will have critics say, well, look, it makes no difference if you have tight gun laws.
Well, I tell those critics, go visit that 13-year-old boy that was shot yesterday while sitting in the back of the car. We need to stop criticizing good, proper law enforcement with the proper proactive things to keep guns out of the hands of young people. And that's the combination that we're going to do.
So why aren't the laws working?
For a number of reasons. We have a small number of gun dealers that are just skating the law. We're dealing with a problem with ghost guns. It's imperative that we come up with clear messages around ghost guns and the kits that assembles them. And I believe Washington is going to do that. Then we need to put money into the ATF so they can do the proper information sharing, so we can identify the flow of guns in the inner cities. And that is what we're doing in New York with our combined efforts of all law enforcement agencies.
It sounds like you're expecting more executive actions or orders from the president to do this, because none of it's going to get through Congress.
Well, it's a combination. I think executive orders are crucial, but while we're waiting for the president and the White House to continue to do the good things they're doing, I have to do the things we must do on the ground in New York City, and that's what we're doing. My officers are stepping up with quality of life issues, and we're zeroing in on dangerous gangs and zeroing in on those who are trigger pullers and carrying guns.
I want to ask you about that. You called it quality of life. It's quality of life enforcement. You yourself have been quite critical of past mayors when they have used tactics known as like broken windows, right? Going after these sort of smaller scale crimes. Quality of life includes offenses that are precursors to violence, marijuana sales, public urination, things like that. Aren't these the same zero tolerance policies that in the past have been exploited and caused civil rights violations?
Oh, and I'm glad that you pointed out the history, because this is my history of fighting against heavy-handed and abusive policing. You can have the justice that we deserve with the safety we need. Here's what we talk about when we say quality of life. Not allowing someone to go into a store, steal what they want, and then walk out. Jump in the turnstiles, not paying your fare in the subway system. Many of the criminal element, they are actually going into the subway system without paying their fare and committing crimes. We learned that during the mid-90s and early 90s. But also looking at just open drug use, injecting yourself with heroin in our parks in front of our children, loud noise, just being disorderly. Some of the things we're doing around encampment. You don't have to use police to remove the encampments in our city like we're doing. We're doing a combination of social services, giving people the dignity they deserve. That is what we talk about, cleaning our streets and making sure that we don't have a state of disorder.
But all of what you're laying out, no one's for those things, but they're concerned that this is just dressing back up the broken windows theory, that you're doing the same things, but relabeling it?
Well, I think that it's important for people to say, well, let's look at who's implementing the proper use of dealing with quality of life. Eric Adams, I was a leading voice that testified in federal court about the overuse of police tactics. Now I'm in charge of that police department, and I know how we can run a police department with a great police commissioner, Commissioner Sewell, where we're going to make sure we don't have disorder in our city, where we're going to lawfully show people that this is a city where the quality of life is important.
But you have said things like you won't tolerate bystanders being on top of police officers to film their activities. Isn't the public reporting eyewitness accounts like this exactly what has stopped, or at least laid bare, violations such as the killing of George Floyd? Isn't that kind of public reporting important?
Right, and let me tell you what I've done throughout my years. I've done something called What to Do with Stop by the Police, how to film police, how to do it properly. Nothing is more dangerous than if a police officer is fighting with someone that has a gun and you have a person standing over him taping that interaction. That is extremely dangerous. That officer is not aware of who's behind him. Many days that I've fought with individuals who were carrying weapons or knives, and I've had people stand over me with a camera. That is extremely dangerous because you don't know what you have. So what we're saying to New Yorkers, film. Eric Gardner case, the young man filmed a safe distance away. He did not interrupt or interfere. That is how you film. You don't do it that endangers yourself or that police officer who's taking action.
Mr. Mayor, thank you for your time today.
Thank you. Good seeing you.
We'll be right back. Today, we say a fond farewell to Greg Scooter Schaefer, who is retiring from CBS News after almost 40 years. Scooter spent just about all of those Sundays in the audio booth here in the Washington Bureau, making sure you could hear us and our guests loud and clear. When Scooter arrived at CBS, George Herman was the host of Face the Nation, and he's worked with every moderator since, including myself, Bob Schieffer, Leslie Stahl, and John Dickerson. Thank you, Scooter, for decades and well over 1,500 Sundays of your dedication. We wish you all the best in your retirement, and we will always be your family. That's it for us today. Thank you for watching. Until next week, for Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.